it's Friday. It must be Fundraisers Friday, right? Welcome, Mr. Tony Bell.
Well, thank you. Happy Friday, Julia. Always great to see you, and hope our viewers and listeners have had an incredible and rewarding week. And just thank you for all you do.
Yes, exactly. Thank you for all you do. I feel like in the fundraisers world, for a lot of fundraisers, Friday is like the kickoff to even more work over the weekend, right? Because they have events, they have things that they're doing, and it's just like, it's like it's a tough thing, but we are thrilled that you are here with us. And this is one of our fundraisers forum days. We don't do this very often, but it's with all the different questions that come in. And I was telling Tony in the green room, along with Kevin Pace, our executive producer, these are things that often are asked of us when we're out in public. And sometimes they come through email or social media, which of course we welcome. But a lot of these questions this week or for this episode actually came forward. What also comes forward are our presenting sponsors. They include Bloomerang, American Nonprofit Academy, Staffing Boutique, JMT Consulting, Interim Executives Academy, Your Part-Time Controller, and of course, Fundraisers Friday. I mean, what could be better? I'm Julia C. Patrick, CEO of the American Nonprofit Academy, joined by the amazing Tony Bell, Mr. Nonprofit Consultancy, the guru of all things in the nonprofit space. Okay, first question out the gate, really interesting. How do you feel about fundraising committees that serve the board of directors? Meaning they're probably not even board members, that they report back up to the board and the board is not necessarily engaged in these fundraising committees. It's kind of an interesting conundrum.
It is an interesting conundrum, and actually, Julia, when I reflect back on the majority of my fundraising experience, this was a model that was used for many of the organizations that I served and I worked for. So there is a national organization that relies very heavily on volunteer committees to help them produce very successful events. So that that particular model really speaks to this. So in that scenario, a development professional may be responsible for leading and managing a volunteer team, as many as 10 different volunteer committees over a calendar year to produce different fundraising events and generate donations for the organization. So it doesn't surprise me. So how do I feel about it? I think it's a great model because one, it encourages community engagement, which is really important. It also allows you an opportunity when we think about succession planning, when you have volunteer committees that are really just committed to your mission and supporting the organization, you can start to kind of see the leadership that exists within those committees and start looking at new potential board members based on the activity and the success of volunteer performance in these different committees. So again, when we think about succession planning and who's going to serve on the board and lead the organization to the future, a lot of times we look at these volunteer committees for those future leaders.
So that's not at all what I thought. I didn't take it to that degree. What I immediately, when I read this, I thought, oh, it's like the board is not engaged in fundraising. They're like, oh, that's for those folks, And so I thought it was kind of an interesting separation. Like board members saying, oh, well, we do governance and we do strategic planning and we're not engaged in that. Let those folks do it. And so it's interesting to hear your perspective on this. I know you led a team that included the production, I'm going to use the word production, but the implementation of 11 different events every year. So I can see what where your mindset is on this.
Yeah, but also, my experience in this is that the board for that organization was heavily engaged in finding the individuals to serve on these committees.
Gotcha.
While they may not have been heavily engaged in the front line fundraising and making asks, again, this was an event heavy. Again, we have to think about the model, right? What
Yes.
for the organizations. And this particular model was very event driven. It was all about special events. But the board was very actively involved in recruiting and securing folks to serve on these volunteer committees. So they didn't really just kind of say this is somebody else's conversation and challenge. They lived up to the expectations in terms of helping to populate these event committees.
Two things I find fascinating. I love that you brought up the point that this could be a cultivation, avenue for next gen board leaders or people coming into the organization with more responsibility. The other thing I'd love to ask you, Tony Bell, before we move on is, do you think this is a model more, is a better fit for a national organization where they have events spread out throughout the country, or is it better suited for, a community or a region?
That's a really good question. I've seen it in both, but
Okay.
the difference is when we talk about national organizations that lean into this model, they lean into this model for regional chapter support. So it may be a national organization, but these volunteer committees are supporting regional and local events and activities, not necessarily supporting the creation of a marquee national event.
Right. Okay. Interesting. Well, really good question. And it's something that we hadn't really had before, right? It's a little different of a take. And so super interesting. Well, let's move on to the next thing. We've had this question before, and I think it's funny to me. It kind of ebbs and flows, and now it's more being discussed more. And that is, should we accept donations of cryptocurrencies and DAFs? Donor advised funds. They're pretty different. They're not exactly the same thing at all. But I feel, Tony, that they're being lumped together. I don't know what you're seeing.
Yeah, I think they're only being lumped together because they're so new, at least in the mindset of
Yeah.
some folks. Donor advised funds are not necessarily new.
Yeah.
Crypto definitely newer to the environment. What I think about donor advised funds, and there are many folks better educated in this than I, but it's not something new to me. There have always been donor designated, donor advised funds throughout my career. I think what we're finding now is a heightened awareness of them, more formality around what that looks like. And so when we think about crypto or donor advised funds, my first thought is amen, hallelujah, because we need to diversify. And we talk all the time about the importance of diversification in our funding streams. And so if we truly embrace the idea of having as many revenue streams or funding lanes as possible, then we definitely need to explore cryptocurrency and donor advised funds. And what does that mean in terms of our infrastructure? Do we have the policies and procedures in place to accept these gifts? Do we have, again, the technology and the systems in place to manage these gifts, to receive them and sell them, or whatever it looks like? Again, I'm not the expert. But again, I say hallelujah to anything that helps us further diversify the opportunities to raise money. And because it's new, there's just a huge opportunity for everyone to become educated on what it looks like, and if it's right for your organization. You don't want to go down a lane where you're not going to get a return on the effort. So understanding it if it's right for your community and your and the types of donors that typically engage with your organization and your mission.
Yeah, I love that you added that, the type of donor, because it really is, I think, a lens into what those next gen donors are. I think a friend of the show, Mitch Stein and Chariot, which is really an innovative DAF management portal that you can put onto your website, and then it orchestrates those donations through, because they have exploded. I mean, it used to be a rarefied thing that I think its Fidelity started, right? A
Mm-hmm.
long time ago. So it's not a new thing, but I think it's a new tool for a lot of lower level donors that are getting into it. And so I think that's really something you're right. Look into, because it's not going away. It's just going to be picking up speed. And I think if you have a donor set or donor demographic that's used to being able to use their DAFs, and then they find your organization and you don't have that ability, they're going to be like, yeah, okay, next, let me go to somebody who can orchestrate my donation.
Oh, for sure. And also when we think about the responsibility of fundraising professionals to know and understand all of these different verticals and opportunities to raise funds. When you think about donor advised funds and kind of the network to engage with and financial advisors, it's a whole different kind of arena in many cases, at least some of what I've come to understand around donor advised funds.
Yeah, I agree with you. I
So
think that,
again, just realizing the skill sets and the learning that might need to take place with your existing team for them to fully understand what both of those look like.
right. And I would add that you need to really invest some time with your finance department and your accountants about what they're seeing, what they're understanding, and how you manage it. There are a lot of strict guidelines on use with those two different tools. Again, they're very different, but you have to understand kind of what the legalities of it are. And yeah, very, very interesting. I think the crypto thing kind of fell by the wayside, then it came back up, then it fell down, now it's back up, the discussion. And so I think it's a good idea to understand what it might look like. And it's okay, I think, for an organization if you're like, we don't have the bandwidth for this at this point in time. I don't think there's any harm in that.
Yeah, no, there's no harm in that. The other thing I might add to that, Julie, is if you're going in the direction, particularly if we're talking about crypto currency and what that looks like for your organization and engaging in that, when we lead with transparency, that will be somehow or another visible and communicated and become common knowledge of your existing donor base. So if you have a donor base that's very conservative, you're going to want to think about what is your communication should any of those more conservative donors see or realize or hear that you're leaning into the crypto space and navigating that. How are you responding to them? How are you educating them on the value of that so that they don't feel like that you're taking risks that they may perceive exist when you engage in crypto?
Wow, that's a super cool comment. Not one I would have thought of. I That's why I love having Tony Bell on Mr. Nonprofit Consultancy.
Thanks.
Fabulous. Fabulous, fabulous. Well, thank you for kind of giving us even more to think about. Let's move on to this question, and this does dovetail to what you just said in terms of transparency. The question is, how important is it to have a fully printed annual report, or can we just use a PDF? Okay. I mean,
I think it depends on the audience. We speak, and when I say we, sometimes I mean you and I, and sometimes I mean the collective, the universal we. I guess this time I mean like both of them. But when we talk about marketing, and I feel like if you're going to put the effort into an annual report, it also not only needs to have incredible data, but needs to tell a story. It needs to be an incredible marketing piece, right? So that there's just this awesome combination of style and substance that exists within your annual report. But we talk in terms of communication style and communicate. So style, frequency. When we talk about donors, some donors want communication every month. Some just want it every quarter. Some annually, is fine. So I think the same thing when we come to this conversation about an annual report. Some folks are going to want to touch it. They're going to want to flip through the pages. They're going to, rub the shiny paper. They're going to want to do all of that. And it's a keepsake. Who knows? They may be keeping them year after year, where others are going to be like, you know what? Save your money. Don't kill a tree. Send me a PDF. So I think it's important, again, to be mindful of your audience. We had a similar conversation just this week with our local AFP chapter around a little different, kind of the same, around our souvenir journal for our National Philanthropy Day event. And should it be printed, or is providing a QR code to a digital copy enough? And there was a really robust conversation around, particularly, and sometimes this plays in an annual report, that folks that are advertising want they want something they can touch. They don't want you to send them a QR code and they can just flip around on their computer and see their ad. Not unless you're going to start reporting on open rates and view rates for the PDFs and all of that good stuff. So again, the audience, kind of what they're used to, what are some of the norms, and what are your resources and bandwidth? I like having both, because I recognize that there are folks that are going to want the printed copy, and there are going to be folks that are going to want the PDF. So provide both. And if it's an expense issue, kind of figure that out too. Don't make the assumption that you have to print a copy of that for every single donor. Maybe it's just to the top 5% of your donors or something, so that you minimize that print expense.
Right. Well, I like what you said about it should be a marketing tool, so that it's a tool that your development team or anybody that's doing fundraising, going out, selling sponsorships, building relationships with funders, that there's that tool, because I do believe that there's something to be said for that physical manifestation of this is what our work is, and this is the degree of professionalism. And I think you said something really smart, and that is that, now it's not an all or nothing. You can do print on demand. You can do short runs that look great, that are bound, that are sexy and glossy and have all that, versus back in the day where it was like one and done and you had to print 5,000 of something to get it done, right? That's just not the case. We have technology, even at your local, your local printers have things that they can do, and self-binding machines that are Xerox or photocopy, I should say, right? So I agree with you. Don't hogtie yourself to thinking that it's just like, huge thing, that it can be a smaller run. So interesting.
Yeah. Okay. No, it's important that you brought up, the opportunities now, but you're right, Julia. There was a time where it would cost more to print 100 than it would cost to print 500.
Yes. Yes. That's
just,
very, very true.
Again, just understanding the print on demand opportunities and all of that. That was a really good point.
Okay, let's go to, this is a really interesting question. This came to me, actually, I was out and about and somebody stopped me, and it's a new person. It's a person that's been in the nonprofit sector, that's navigated to fundraising because they so believe in the mission. They're very excited. They haven't had a lot of training. And their question was, because somebody asked them and they didn't know the answer, was what is the multiplier of their salary to their funds raised? If their annual salary is $150K, what is it that they should be bringing in based on that salary? Very interesting.
So one, it's a good question, but it's an unfair question.
Mhm.
because a professional fundraiser's value and worth to an organization goes beyond the amount of money that they bring into the organization. And so when we think about a performance appraisal for a professional fundraiser, there needs to be more in that appraisal than the amount of money that you have brought into the organization.
Yeah.
There are retention rates that should be considered. There's pipeline activity that should be considered. There's growth that should be considered. So I just want to say that this question does not encompass the total success or value that a fundraising professional brings to an organization. But that being said, there are ratios and there are statistics and there is data to answer this question. So, a development officer or someone in fundraising is the typical expectation is that the ratio is 1 to 5 or 1 to 10. So if you think about that on the high end, for a individual that is earning $150,000 annually, the expectation from the organization might be that they are raising at least $1.5 million. And I'll say 1.5 million net, not gross,
Okay.
but 1.5 million net to the organization. And then that might vary based on the job title of the individual. So I did some research on this because I thought this was a particularly interesting question. But for folks that might be a major gifts officer, that ratio might be 1 to 20. Or a planned giving officer, that ratio might be 1 to 50. But there is a realization, especially for a planned giving officer, if the ratio is 1 to 50, there is an expectation that there is a longer runway for them to choose that for them to achieve, pardon me, that 1 to 50 ratio than it might be for a fundraising assistant or development director for that 1 to 5 or 1 to 10 ratio.
Okay. Yeah. Really interesting. First of all, thank you for reorienting ourselves about the professionalism and what it is that professional fundraisers actually do and their impact. That we need to look at this more holistically. So it reminds me how often you say we need to advocate for ourselves and we need to express what it is that we're doing. Because this question actually came from a board member to an employee, and it was really an intimidating, and it rattled this gal's cage. I'll be honest with you.
Well, you used the word the first word I thought of was it's pretty intimidating. It's an intimidating question, and it's a tough one to answer because it doesn't encompass all of the value that
Yeah.
folks bring to the organization and all of the things that need to be considered. So
Yeah.
even in that 1 to 5, 1 to 10, that success is based on pipeline, retention, growth, all of that.
Yeah, I love that you added that. I think that's really powerful and a great way to be thinking about this. It again too, I think it also um, as professional fundraisers and people in our sector, we need to know the answers to these things, right? I mean, and again, as we just were chatting about the advocacy, I gotta believe that there are people internally that would have no idea about that number, that strategy. And so, we're not doing ourselves any favor if we aren't um, armed with that information, right? And
Mhm.
have that elevator speech even. It's like, what is it we do? Why is it that we do this? And get a fuller picture. Because I'm appalled all the time, Tony, it even within our own organizations, we don't understand what fundraisers do. We just think that they dial for dollars or they go out for cocktails and go to parties all the time. We don't
Mhm.
really understand, what's going on. And then they're either the heroes or the villains, right? They either
Mhm.
bring in all this money and they meet the goals or they don't. And it's like throw the bums out. It's an
Mhm.
awful, awful part of the ecosystem.
It makes it, very challenging in many ways. Uh, but it doesn't define the work, right? I mean, it doesn't define the joy and the outcomes, of the work, but it is one of those challenging pieces of what we do and what our listeners and viewers do every day.
Yeah.
And when a board member, I mean, and again, I find that extra intimidating,
Yeah.
uh, because if a board member asks me about that ratio, and then now I'm thinking, am I meeting that ratio? Are they
Yeah.
looking at reducing salaries if we're not meeting that ratio? So it can really be unsettling for a nonprofit professional, and really just kind of a loss of any sense of security
Yeah.
in the organization when a board member in particular asks that kind of question.
Yeah, yeah. Well, and like I said, this individual who's full of passion and excitement for their mission and really wants to do well, it rattled her cage, and it was, you think of that phrase, never work from the point of fear, right? And because that never works. It just does nothing but bring things down. And
It,
wow,
yeah,
it did.
it never works, but it's funny, Julia. This particular conversation, this topic, makes me even more proud to be part of the nonprofit show and Fundraisers Friday, and a part of the conversations that we have on a weekly basis. Because for anyone else that might get that question, I feel like now they're armed and ready with
Yes.
information to be able to speak to it, and to be able to speak to, well, based on job title, it might be this, and based on
Yeah.
my job title, it should be this. But that's not all that should be considered. There are these other factors that need to be considered when we talk about the true and full impact of my service to the organization.
Right.
So
I
I'm
love
super proud of this conversation.
Yeah, that's really cool. Well, thank you. I think that's a wonderful way to wrap things up. And as Tony and I mentioned, people ask us questions specifically for Fundraisers Friday and to get onto the nonprofit show. So we want to know what you're thinking. And so reach out to us. You can email directly at info@americannonprofitacademy.com. Stop us if you see us walking down the street. Use our socials. Yeah, we want to know because we're really excited to help continue this conversation. One of the big conversations we have here each and every day are those people that support us. They include Bloomerang, American Nonprofit Academy, Staffing Boutique, JMT Consulting, Interim Executives Academy, Your Part-Time Controller, and of course, Fundraisers Friday. So we want to express our gratitude. Tony, always, you give me so much to think about, so much to be, as you mentioned, proud of. And holy moly, great things are happening across the nonprofit sector day in and day out. So thank you for helping lift everyone up. I appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you again for the opportunity, and happy Friday.
Happy Friday. All right, everybody, we end each and every episode with this message. And I hear it differently all the time when I say it. It goes like this: to stay well so you can do well.